G'day and welcome to Quilting with Don, and in this episode I'm going to finish this quilt top that I quilted in the last episode. It's going to be very cool. Because it's round, clearly it's going to need a bias binding, and this isn't the first time for me to do that, and I got a special treat for you, so stay tuned. Before I get into that though, I apologize up front for not having got to this sooner for anyone that was waiting for the next episode. I've been busy doing other stuff. I've been busy, well, piping, diving, biking, and even doing some camping. I did some camping just in the last week with Carolyn. You also may notice this shirt. This shirt was debuted last Christmas Day when Carolyn and I made a Christmas pizza, our annual tradition that we do every year. Click on the link if you want to see how we make pizza Christmas style. It's very cool. But anyway, this shirt is a Josh, because my piping buddy Josh gave me this shirt for Christmas last year as a gag, but it's a fun shirt. So the reason I'm wearing it now is because today is the first anniversary of Josh and Eden's wedding. They got married a year ago today. So that's pretty cool, and I thought I'd wear this shirt. All right, so I'm also going to use the blue fabric that I used for the borders and in this filler area for the binding. No surprise there, it's going to blend in very nicely. Nothing, I didn't want to ring the quilt top in something different. I wanted to just blend in. And for on the back side, I'm going to put a hanging sleeve similar to what I did on the last quilt, so that I can insert something rigid to hang on the wall. And it's going to be the same fabric that I used on the back side of the quilt. Okay, so now on to the surprise. Notice anything different?
Hey guys.
Carolyn, my wife and quilting advisor extraordinaire. It turns out there's many ways to do a bias binding. And I was Googling and YouTubing, and Carolyn said, well, that's all fine, but I think, let me show you something. So Carolyn.
So what you need to do is find your 45-degree angle, make a trapezoid, cut the strips, sew the strips together, and then you have a bias binding. Simples.
It is, actually, you'll see, because we're going to show you. But what is really cool about this, using Carolyn's own words, there's no waste.
Yeah, I don't like waste.
Because you'll see that there is no leftover fabric, even though you're cutting stuff on a 45-degree angle. It is very cool. I haven't done it, but I drew with a pencil, and I figured out how much fabric we needed, because I have to. And it turns out, if we use for this top is 30 inches, so math says it's about 100 inches of binding needed. Easily done with a
fat quarter.
Yeah, but Carolyn says I don't want to waste just to cut out a fat quarter out of our regular yardage, so we're going to cut an 18-inch wide strip with the fabric and use that. And I think it's going to make a lot of extra.
Well, it will, but we'll use that for other projects.
So there we are.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to do it. So Carolyn let me work on my own here to at least set this up. So what I've done is taken with the fabric, about 42 inches by 18 inches. 42 this way, 18 this way. And what we're going to do now, and Carolyn and I actually spent quite a bit of time discussing, and I finally figured out a couple things. But what we're going to do is cut off a triangle here, roughly along that line there, vroom, and then this piece goes to the other end, and it makes a trapezoid. So then the tricky part comes in, making the 45. There's many ways to do this, and Carolyn convinced me that the easiest way is to just do like this. Fold the fabric over on itself, and you get a nice 45, and you finger press it. So I've done that already. And you may be able to see it on the camera, there's a line here. Now here's where we got into a lot of discussion, because you will understand that when I take this piece and move it to the other side and sew it on the other straight edge, there's going to be a seam allowance. And what's going to end up happening is the bottoms won't line up because there's a jaggy. And after Carolyn says it won't matter, because by the time you start cutting across that, you're probably, the chances of having a perfect strip at the end are very unlikely, and it won't matter. But due to the engineering geekiness of myself, what I did then is I marked here and there where the line is, and then I marked a 1/4 inch in each way. And that's where I'm going to cut my 45 degrees. So here we go. So now, da-da-da! So what we do then, watch this. This is the cool part.
Without changing orientation.
I slide this over here, like that, and I'm going to take this piece, like that, right? I don't know if you can see it all, and I'll sew it on, goods to goods. So I'll sew it here. And because I've left my seam allowance, you'll see that it's going to line up a corner, it's going to line up right there, theoretically, and I'll have a nice even seam. And there's my seam with a nice seam allowance. It worked very well. So I like this angle better for cutting, as it turns out. So spare fabric to the right. And also Carolyn convinced me to do a 2 1/4 inch strips instead of 2 1/2 inch for a standard binding because I'm going to hand sew the back of the binding, so I'll have a lot of control on exactly where it's placed, and I can make a nice tight binding. Because the batting I use is not that thick. It's okay to use a 2 1/4 inch folded in half. So then I'm going to do 1 2 1/4 inches, and let's start cutting. There's 5 strips, and because the whole point of this trapezoid was to keep going, I'm going to keep cutting. I'm going to keep cutting. Success.
I stepped away during the boring bits.
And nobody had to die. Well, it was close while we were discussing. And you know what? And I'll give Carolyn credit, because you remember when I did that 1/4 inch seam allowance for my 45-degree cut? I didn't need to do that. It could have been a little jaggy at the end because the last strip was too narrow anyway. I fussed for nothing. Carolyn, sorry I ever doubted you. She said, don't worry about it. So anyway, you didn't see it, but you saw the results. There they are. It ended up making 13 strips, 2 1/4 inches wide. Each strip is about 25, 26 inches long. So I only need 4 for circling around this. That gives us another 9 for something else.
For about a small twin size or a lap quilt. And that means that I've got it ready to go for the next project.
Yeah.
And what's nice about this bias is you can use it on a regular quilt. You don't have to use it for just the oddly shaped ones.
I asked Carolyn that question.
Yeah. The theory is that, and some people will tell you that they prefer to have a bias binding on the regular quilts because it wears better, because the grains are going diagonally around the edges instead of across the edges. I have yet to have a binding wear out on me. Even when it's been washed multiple times, the stitching will wear out before the binding actually wears out. So, choice is yours.
What was the other reason you do a bias?
Well, for curves. We do it for curves because it stretches. And you may see it here when I put it in half. There's some stretch here. Even folded in half, it stretches. So when you fold it in half and then you fold it again, you still have the ability to make really nice, tight curves. So yeah, that's why you'd use a bias binding.
That was pretty important to say that. I was just assuming it because the book said to do it.
And the other thing that you might want to know is that it doesn't matter if you use a square or a rectangle to make your trapezoid.
Like if you're using a fat quarter, for example.
Because a fat quarter is perfectly acceptable for most lap quilts. So it gives you the nice size, it gives you enough coverage for it. And it doesn't matter if it's a Canadian fat quarter, which is 20 by 21-ish, or an American fat quarter, which is 18 by 20. So they all work really well to give you a lot of binding strips that are on the bias.
So there So there you are. There you are. All y'all have now heard the official answer on bias bindings. Right, I finished making the binding. I have 101 inches of 2 1/4 inch now, 1 1/8 inch, because I pressed it on itself, binding. Good to go around the edge of the blazing star because Matt says that I needed 91 inches. That's pi times the diameter, pi being, no, not apple, but it's the trigonometric number 3.1415 or something. Anyway, I need 91 inches, and I've got 101. So we're good. Day 2 of working on the binding and the way to mount it. I'm ready to do the binding, but first, my sequence of operations is going to be simply this. I've got to make, and I'm going to make a sleeve on the back of the quilt that matches, is very similar in concept to the last one I did, where I'm going to create a sleeve that I can slide a stiff insert, probably made out of plywood, to frame the upper half curve of the quilt. So what I'm going to do is piece together 4 pieces of fabric like this. Oops, sorry, like this. I used a template. This is 1/8 of a circle, with an outer diameter of 29¼ inches because I measured the quilt top and that's what it is. Diameter is 29¼ so I've made 4 pieces like this. I'm going to sew them together and it'll be then sewn onto the back of the quilt. Straightforward operation, and that will make my sleeve. I do, of course, when I sew it first together, before I put it on the quilt, I have to finish the outer edges that I'm not going to sew onto the quilt so that I have a finished edge. Simple. Here you see where I've laid the back of the quilt and the ring I just made, or the half ring I made with the material I'm now going to sew on top. After I sew over 1/4 to 1/2 inch of a hem on the bottom edge. Okay, so I've hemmed the strip. I've pinned it to the backing here, and I'm going to sew it on. I'm also using the walking foot, and I've moved the needle to the right to make this roughly an 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Certainly less than 1/4, because when I sew the front on, I do not want to see this seam. Done. Okay, I'm going to sew the binding on. I pinned it all the way around, the bias binding, and you can see here I've got lots of tail to finish it. So once again, if everything goes well, here we go. I've set the needle to give me a good solid 1/4 inch from my reference point on the walking foot. Measured it with this handy dandy measuring gauge here, but I will check it after a few stitches to make sure that I am not wrong. That's it. And notwithstanding the overlap of the tails, I'm ready to finish the binding. I have done and finished the binding. It took me about 1.5 hours a couple nights ago, and it was actually pretty straightforward using a ladder stitch. So let me show you how it came out. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. That's going to be, you have to wait for the reveal on that one. So okay, there's a nibbling in here, but let's zoom in on the binding here. So that's a great 1/4 inch binding. And when you fold it over, again, ladder stitch, it came out really nice. Nice and even. So the other thing, I'll show you now, is I'm going to now figure out how to hang something, push something into this sleeve here to hang the quilt. And what I did, as an experiment, I'm going to try this. I was at the local craft shop to see if they had anything that I could use. Because I do have some plywood I could use, but that's heavy and involves jigsaw, and I thought, well, maybe there's an easier solution. Actually, Carolyn insisted I try something easier. So I found this piece of styrofoam, dense. I'm hoping it's cuttable. I can cut it, trim it to the round shape I want. It's almost wide enough. In fact, I think it'll work just perfectly the way it is. Once I cut a half circle-ish with a 28-inch radius, because that's what I need. All right, success. I made the piece of styrofoam into the curve like you see here, and it works. It definitely snags the outer border like I hoped it would. And you can lift it up just like that. So it works. And now, ta-da! It's done. Everything's good to go and it can be mounted on a wall. Now, just to show you, here's the cutout piece of foam I made that goes on the back and snugs in and holds it up. Not quite happy with this because it's a little too thick. I am going to go with a piece of plywood. A thin piece of plywood instead. I think I'm going to prefer that. But anyway, look at this. Isn't this great? Here's a close-up. Really like how the colors pop, the quilting works. It's just a nice piece along with a really nice binding. So, those who know me know I like to toast all that quilt. Today our toast is going to be, ready for this, a margarita. Now, good margaritas are made with lime, triple sec, and of course tequila. Well, I don't have all those ingredients, but what I do have is this really cool tequila margarita in a can from this company called Cutwater. It's 12.5% alcohol, so it's not a weak margarita. But the real cool thing is they taste like the real thing you'd get at a restaurant made by the pros. So I've taken the liberty of filling my delirium glass with the pink elephant because that's what it's going to be after too many of these margaritas. And I'm going to toast this quilt with a fresh, from a can, margarita. These are so good. So, hope you enjoyed this series of Quilting with Dawn. Paper piecing? Paper piecing works. Quilting works. Free motion quilting works. And I like the way it came out. Learned a lot. Hope you enjoyed it once again. Cheers. Oh, that is a good margarita.